Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. We will get everyone in the webinar and then kick off in a few minutes. Let's see, we still got some folks joining in, and let's see if I can find. Give it a few more minutes, see some more people hopping in here. And then, okay. All right, Justin, can we hear you?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. All righty. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. We are excited to bring one of our more requested topics to you this morning. Before we get started in the presentation, just want to run through some housekeeping items. You will see in the Zoom toolbar here that we have a Q&A section. So first we'll have the presentation and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Please drop all your questions in the Q&A. You can also view other folks' questions and upvote questions that you like as well. And then at the end of the presentation, we will run through the queue for the Q&A. If you have any specific questions for us, you can also shoot that in the chat directly to me as well. And then after this, at the end of the webinar, you'll also get a survey. So for our new first-time visitors, you'll be able to not only share your feedback, but also let us know next steps as far as having a team member reach out or getting you started on the software. Other than that, Justin, that's all I got. I will kick it over to you.
All right, great. Thank you, Macklin. Thanks everybody for coming. Yeah, so today we're going to go through, I guess, a little bit more of a kind of fine-tuned, deeper dive into the Income Lab software. But I'll try to make it interesting and applicable to the kinds of planning that you're doing. So today is really all about kind of how to create plans, how to present them, how to evaluate them based on the outputs, how to explore different options that you might be considering for the advice for a particular set of clients. So make sure this is working. We're going to start out by building kind of a base plan. I've tried to make it relatively realistic and include some things that, although maybe you don't run into them to precisely these things, hopefully they're kind of like a model for other things you might want to do in your plans. Then we'll talk about presenting a plan. And today we're mostly going to focus on kind of the core part of an income lab plan, the retirement income plan, the adjustment plan, and so on. And then we'll dive into some interesting kind of plan scenarios. Okay, what if, what if we change retirement date? What if we, do all sorts of different things? So should be fun, and hopefully it'll elicit a fair number of comments and questions. So the kind of the persona that we're dealing with here are some folks in their early 60s. Planning to retire relatively soon, so 3 years out. But as you'll see, we'll explore some other options. Maybe they can retire right now and so on. They've built up a portfolio of a little over $2 million, split into a taxable account, a 403b, and a 401k. They are saving aggressively. So they're each saving $18,000 a year into retirement accounts plus an employee match. They do have a rental property, and we've got some Social Security projections as well. Their main liability is they still have a mortgage to be paid off in about 9 years. So with that, let's jump in. Okay, so the first thing that you would do to kind of get these folks going is from the households tab, right? You're going to create a new household. Now I've already created them. They're the Smiths here. And what you would see, is just some basic demographic information. So I already have their birth dates in there and their retirement date. Now, the way that the software works is the first retirement date is really when you're telling the software, hey, here's the point at which I want to know how much I could spend and where I should source that from and so on. So that's kind of the point at which the software is going to switch from assuming that you're spending everything you're making except for the explicit savings plans you made to saying, okay, this is how much you can spend. We're actually working on some features to allow you to kind of fine tune those things a bit more, but that's important to know. I also already have their assets in here. And for employer-based retirement plans, it's really important to get the account type right and to know what's going on with this plan. Are they still working? If they're not still working, did they leave that employer at or after age 55, right? These are important things for premature withdrawal penalties and so on. So in this case, I've got John retiring and leaving this employer, right before he retires, for example. So those are crucial things to getting the plan right. I do have a few other things in here, maybe worth highlighting. So, they've got some term life insurance. As much as possible, we try to make it possible to build a base plan with kind of as the minimum that you have available so that you can use this with prospects and so on. But the more I add, the closer I get to reality, really the better. And, down to the point where I can even pull in this insurance premium into the budget, into the expense list automatically right here. So I've chosen to call this an other/variable expense. We'll talk about that in a second, that difference between a baseline and variable expense, because that's another important one. In fact, we'll do it right here. So this is where I've put that main liability, right? They still have a mortgage on 123 Main Street. And, I'm going to put the balance in as of when I know it and the end date. And again, I can pull in that this is a major and important expense for them, right? And I can include the principal and interest payment automatically, either by specifying the interest rate, or if I know the principal and interest payment, just specify that here. If it were a balloon mortgage or an interest only mortgage, I could also make that setting here in the structure. But I've called it an other variable expense. What that means is this is an expense. We definitely have to pay it, but when it drops off, I'm not going to replace it with something else, right? So the core kind of, as I build this baseline plan, what I'm trying to do is figure out kind of what income level, what paycheck replacement can the Smiths have in retirement, assuming that they're retiring in 2025. So I'm trying to make an estimate of sort of their lifestyle, the lifestyle that they can support. So this mortgage payment is really important, but I want to kind of set it to the side and say, okay, well, we need to pay off our mortgage, but tell me what else they can spend on top of it, because I'm not going to replace this mortgage in this plan once they're done paying it off. So that's what an other/variable expense is. If it were a baseline expense, that's more of the, hey, just ongoing life costs, right? Your groceries, your gas, your insurance, and so on. So that's the main difference. You can see I have the account contributions in here. As I said, they're saving aggressively. I've put the contributions and the match together. You can split those out. You can do, that plus, maybe there's also a profit sharing. You can do as many different types of contributions as possible. And for a pre-retirement plan, really the savings plan is a place where you can do some A/B testing as well, right? What kind of savings plan can get us to our goals? But for these folks, they're already doing some pretty healthy savings. And I can just set it to end at John's retirement. As I change retirement dates, that'll automatically change. Now this couple, they both have paid into Social Security, but Mary a lot less. Maybe she works for a public enterprise or something, didn't pay in as long. But so I have their estimated PIA, their primary insurance amount, already put in here. And you can see hers is quite a bit lower than his. And I did that on purpose because I want to show how you can evaluate these kind of situations where a spousal benefit might come into play. So I have him starting Social Security right on the retirement date here. And we'll see that for her, based on those primary insurance amounts, we'd expect her to take his spousal benefit at some point, right? Because half of his primary insurance amount is greater than her primary insurance amount. And you'll see down here, this slider allows me to see how much she would get at the beginning as soon as she files for retirement, right? So we can see before her full retirement age, it's reduced as we would expect, right? So I think 800 was her primary insurance amount, but I've got to get all the way to full retirement to see that. But by then, John has claimed, and so in fact, she'd be getting her spousal benefit. So you'll only see the spousal benefit shown here as Social Security income if that's the amount she would get when she starts. But if I have her start at age 62, you'll see, I'll show you another place where you'll see she'll start at this 560, and then it'll bump up when John starts Social Security. You'll also see here that in this case, even waiting 1 month is not going to be worth it for her. You see break even, not possible. That's because, she's going to start her spousal benefit when John starts. And so there's no point at which she would be able to make up for that lost income. So it really looks like here, it's going to make sense, if that's when he's starting, that she should start as soon as she can. All right. We've talked a lot about this before. It's if you look at kind of retirement research, there's a lot about portfolio withdrawal rates and so on, and that's really important. But we need to view that within the full context of a household's other income flows. And so typically in kind of more realistic plans, we see phases of portfolio withdrawals and that are based on kind of filling up spots where there's less other income. So a typical case we've talked about as the retirement hatchet is if you're delaying Social Security, that you would have withdrawals filling that space before Social Security starts. We'll look at an example here of that. But this section is one of the most important other places of a plan. This is where you put all the other income pre-retirement or in retirement for this couple. Pre-retirement, you're going to want to specify that if you're interested in the tax part of the plan, which we are in this case. We're going to explore, for example, Roth conversions. We're going to explore whether those make sense to do even before retirement. And so I have Mary and John's salaries here. Mary is also planning on doing some consulting for a few years at the beginning of retirement, so not kind of fully retiring. So I have that in here. I have it set as self-employment. That's so that she has to pay double FICA. So that's an important thing versus her salary right now is wages, where there's only one level of FICA. Mary also has a pension, and I mentioned that rental income. So these, kind of like I was saying, for your account types, you really want to specify as much as possible what those account types are. If they're related to an employer, are we still working? Did we leave that employer after 55, and so on. Same thing here. The tax treatment of these cash flows really matters. So pension is ordinary income. We already saw self-employment and wages. The rental income, we're estimating over time that 75% of that will be taxable, and maybe they'll spend 25% of it on expenses that they'll be able to write off for that rental property. So again, very important. Also important is if you have any cash flows that change if one spouse passes away. Now, that's not true in the case of the rental income, but in terms of the pension, I've already set that at, say, ends at Mary's death. You'll see that means when Mary dies, it goes down to 0. But if John died, it would stay the same. You can also fine tune those. If you had for example, 50% survivorship pension or annuity, this would be where you would set that. The reason that's important is if we make a plan for a household where we assumed all of this income was going to last till the end of the plan, no matter what, we would be giving them credit for kind of non-portfolio income, right? Income from other sources that is probably higher than they'll actually experience. And so we would be assuming that their investments will be less used, that they won't need as much in withdrawals over the time as they actually might. So behind the scenes within Income Lab, there's a sophisticated actuarial model that's adjusting these cash flows to make sure we're not kind of overstating or painting too rosy a picture of the kind of income that they can sustain, the kind of lifestyle they can sustain. Because again, in building this base plan, which is kind of the first step of the workflow, what we're trying to do is figure out kind of what can they afford, what can they have, right? So the default way to answer to approach a retirement income plan on Income Lab is to answer that question of what can I have, rather than first asking the client, what do you need? In expenses, you can of course build a full baseline expense list, line items and so on. I've just, for the sake of simplicity, just grouped these into a couple of main sections. And for the moment, I don't have any other variable expenses, other than, of course, we already have that pension, or not that pension, that mortgage, which will automatically be pulled in here, but I don't need to double up here. So that's a relatively new feature about a month ago, where we'll just pull that in automatically for you. So if you have older plans where you've double entered things, you may want to go back and change that. Okay, and then finally, on the retirement step, I've pulled in the desired income, which is kind of my full budgeted income, and essential income. So each of those budget items, those baseline items, we can specify, okay, this is what I want, but this is what I need. So I've pulled that in from the expense list. Let's say that John and Mary have 5 grandkids. They'd love to leave them $50,000 each. So we're setting a legacy goal here. I'm also choosing what is the default of an age-based income path. This is a path that follows the retirement smile. So it assumes that this household will spend more early in retirement when they're young, healthy, active, and then as they slow down, they'll spend less on an inflation-adjusted basis. And then that'll come up again toward the end of the plan for some potential increases in healthcare costs and so on. We'll look at a long-term care example soon. And then finally, in power planning, I just left this at the default, which is moderate. So this is a key part of this. What can I afford? Well, what you can afford to spend depends a lot on your risk tolerance, right? So, are you the kind of client who really never wants a call from their advisor saying it's time to pull back? Well, that's fine. We can do that by spending less now, right? Taking less risk now. Are you the kind of client who says, I'm happy with that call as long as it means I can live a little first. Okay, we can be more aggressive. I've shot down the middle here in a moderate setting. And, these are folks in their early 60s. The actuarial model has us kind of at about a 32-year joint life expectancy. And that's what we're planning for here. So this is the first step is, okay, let's kind of paint the picture as reasonably as we can for these folks and get a baseline starting point. Okay, it looks like, gross of taxes, they're around 13.75. Net of taxes, they're under 12,000. And that is the way to look at that is that's a projected amount that they can spend at that retirement date. So that, depends on, a certain amount of growth. That depends on them actually doing the savings that they're planning to do and so on. But crucially, you'll see that this is split up between that baseline part, right? This is kind of their baseline gross spending and those other expenses, which are their mortgage. The reason that's split out is so that you can help them understand that, okay, we've got your mortgage taken care of. Now, can we build a lifestyle for you that's where it's about 13.7 a month, right? That's why that's split out. So the first part of answering that kind of what can I have question is right here. Okay, well, assuming that we have your inputs right, assuming that we have your risk tolerance right, we're projecting that this is about the lifestyle you could sustain. You'll see all of this is in the first month of retirement in today's dollars, right? So they're actually going to be funding this with some Social Security, some portfolio withdrawals, and some other income. So recall there was consulting income, there was rental income, there was a pension, and so on. So how could that change? Potentially, right? We know that retirement is not black and white. You don't succeed or fail. You don't either run off a cliff, Wile E. Coyote style, and run out of money. And on the other side, you don't really let your, portfolio, they want to leave $250,000 behind. If this got up to, $10, $20 million, it probably would be reasonable to have a discussion with them about either spending more, changing their legacy goals, and so on. So you have this income adjustment plan, which is the next place to focus on in the base plan. And if I'm talking with prospects, or this is kind of the first time I'm going through this kind of thing, this is the next place I would go. So, okay, we project about 13.7, and we'll be paying taxes on that, right? But we'd be having to build spending, a kind of a lifestyle that'll fit within that. But things could get better or they could get worse. So what do we project would cause us to recommend a change? And you could see projected 3 years out, if this portfolio went from 2.46 to 2.58, it would call for a bump in spending. Now, in practice, they may or may not take that bump, but this is a time when you can say, look, risk has gone down enough for you that it would be very reasonable for you to spend more. In fact, in this case, all that does is take them back to the risk level that they started with, right? So if they were comfortable with it to start, they'd be comfortable with increasing their spending. On the downside, it's going to take a much larger decrease for this plan to call for an income decrease. So in this case, about 32% reduction would lead to a reduction in income. The reason that's such a large buffer is there's nothing magical about that. That's by design. So most plans that people build on Income Lab are they recognize that people tend to be risk averse. So they would rather have a large safety buffer. You can take a smaller buffer, right? That's by getting more aggressive early on. That's the kind of family that says, I want to spend now. Fine, you tell me if I need to pull back, but I want to spend now. This is more of a moderate plan. And it's saying, okay, you're going to have to sustain a fairly large reduction in order to take a pay cut. Now, in practice, that's just the next adjustment, right? So if things are really bad, if this is 2008, 2009, there may be a series of reductions in income. But this crucially this shows clients that it's not about success and failure. It's not about getting that number exactly right of how much you can spend. right? It's getting a very reasonable, hey, will this work for you? And then what would cause us to make an adjustment? Okay. So that's, this is kind of the core plan. Next, I want to go through get back to our presentation. Some planning questions and planning scenarios, right? So we've kind of built this baseline plan. We have a feel for what they can afford. We have a feel for what that might look like in terms of short-term income adjustments. So what kinds of questions might we now want to explore? Well, an obvious one would be, this is planning for 3 years out. Is it possible for these folks to retire right now? Within Income Lab, you have this income scenarios section, which is really built for scenario planning. And so I've already built some scenarios, including retire in October of this year. So in order to do that, all I had to do was from income scenarios, I can either copy this main household plan, right? That baseline plan, the source of truth, essentially. Or I can just hit create a new scenario, which does the same thing. It copies the baseline plan. So I've done that. And then I want to make some changes. In this case, minimal changes, right? I just set the retirement dates. And I think in this case, I may have made a couple other changes. For example, in the portfolio, I made sure that John had access to his 401k at that same point. But you'll see, now the salaries are ending sooner. The consulting is starting sooner. The pension is I guess I left that one. The rental income is the same. So just some very minor changes. The plan is still the same length, right? It's just that now we're going to have more retirement in that plan. And actually, probably the best place to view this is right here. So we were at 13.7, almost 13.8. Retiring early, not having those contributions, and having to fund a longer period reduces our gross income, a fair amount, about $2,400. And if indeed our desired income, right, which we'd expensed out, is $9,000, so net of taxes, we want $9,000. This is actually telling us, well, with these settings, at least we're not quite there. Now the shortfall is not huge, right? So if this was something that these clients were really interested in, we could start moving a few other levers, right? Maybe we want to change the legacy. I'm not sure that's going to get us all the way, but I can change. Okay, well, whatever the legacy is, it'll be what it is, but we're going to shoot for nothing. Yeah, doesn't quite get us there, but it gets us gets us a lot closer, right? So you can start kind of fine tuning some of these what if scenarios to see if this is possible. All right. You can also see that in this case, it wouldn't be quite as big of a buffer, although it's still fairly large, right? So if they're comfortable with kind of spending a little closer to their budget, it looks like they're kind of within shouting distance of retiring soon, right? You could maybe push this out a few more months, push it out till next summer, right? Obviously, there are things in between retiring now and retiring in 3 years, right? And kind of fine tune that. Okay, on the other side, what about some expenses, right? So we kind of had a very basic plan where the only thing we were really highlighting was the mortgage. And it's crucial to pay off that mortgage, right? What other kinds of things might we consider doing? Okay, what if we buy a lake house? The way to do that is simply add an expense And these what if expenses, these kind of lumpy expenses or one-time expenses, you always want to put in other/variable expenses, because again, what that's going to do is you'll then see how the baseline income changes. You'll kind of see what's the cost of planning for this expense, right? Maybe it was my baseline income was 16,000. I do another thing and it goes down. Okay, well, that's kind of the cost of that extra thing. So we have a one-time $200,000, we're buying this lake house. I know not every lake has houses like that available, but I grew up in Michigan. You can definitely get a lake house there for that. And again, the place where you can see and compare these is, and by the way, I'm back to retiring in 2025 here. So we're at 13.7 without the lake house. With the lake house, I'm at 12.9, almost 13, right? So you're essentially just having to back out your spending by, call it $800. So this is, again, the kind of thing that you can put that choice in front of a client. All right, it looks to me like your kind of sustainable baseline spending, gross of taxes, would have to go down by, call it $800 in order for this to be possible, which may look quite good, right? Now, there are less fun expenses that you might want to consider. And these include things like long-term care. So we get this question a lot. How can I kind of plan for long-term care? In this case, for self-insured long-term care. So kind of setting aside enough that that we can pay for long-term care if we need it. And in this case, we put 4 years of long-term care at $4,000 a month in today's dollars, so adjusted for inflation. If you thought that long-term care might go at higher than inflation level, you can put in your custom inflation there. And I just kind of put it in for 4 years. That's a little longer than average. I believe for men, it's maybe 3 years or a little less, for women, a little more. And I also didn't put it at the very end of the plan. I put it a little bit before the end of the plan, because again, just the reality of this kind of thing is you might actually see, one spouse going into long-term care while the other one is not. And so where we would see that is we see it in the spending here. So the income sourcing says, how am I going to fund all these planned expenses? You kind of see this lump in your portfolio withdrawals. But if you want to see it as a line item, it's under the expenses. So, you can see your mortgage payment dropping off, and you see your long-term care payment here. So now, if I moved this closer, right, if I put it in 2038 or something, it might have more of an effect on my baseline spending. But you see here, the baseline spending is only affected by about $350 by planning for that expense far in the future. But just time value of money, right, if I put it closer, I'm going to see a larger effect. Another place that you can do this kind of thing is in LifeHub. So I've been showing all the inputs in kind of the most boring place. But if I go into LifeHub, let it load here. Now I've already built this, but all I would have to do is create that copy of an account and hit add new. I'll show you the one with long-term care already in it. So if I had just hit add new, expense, variable, long-term care, right? Same exact settings here, but we already have it in LifeHub. And Zoom is very greedy on CPU cycles here. I'm going to discard that. So yeah, in 2022, the long-term care is not there yet. I do have my mortgage payments and my my term insurance By the time I get to 2031, you can see my mortgage is almost paid off. Right, only $8,000 left, and now it's gone. And then I think we had that. Oh yeah, here we go. Long-term care is right here, right? You can see it highlighted on the timeline, so I can see that it's starting now. This is in nominal dollars, so future dollars. So that's the inflated amount of that long-term care that I'm planning for.
Justin, we did get a few questions in here. Wondering if maybe we should take a pause and address some of them, because I know
Sure.
one of them was around long-term care.
Great.
Let me just see. Yeah, so question here is, will we be making it possible to include primary home as part of the legacy goal? And you also kind of, how would you recommend reflecting long-term care expenses, which you just walked through? And the advisor pointed, normally they think of this as something that lasts 2 years of life, but they haven't really figured out how best to reflect it. So I'm not sure if maybe you have any additional thoughts
Yeah,
on time
I
frame
mean, I
there.
think with future expenses and really even future income flows that are a little less certain, there's a judgment call to be made here, right? So I admit this is a little bit of an aggressive long-term care expense. 4,000 I think is maybe a little higher than standard, although you'd want to look for your area, and 4 years is longer than average at least. But being a little more conservative, I think, can make sense. And then also the timing of these things, right? So I've put it a little bit toward the later part of the plan, but if you wanted to be more conservative, you could move it a little bit earlier. The same goes for things like inheritances, right? Those are really important for plans, but since they can be uncertain, probably a little bit of conservatism for these kinds of things makes a lot of sense. On the asset side, LifeHub is a great place to kind of step back from the portfolio legacy goal. So the setting for the plan where it's your legacy goal, that's in portfolio dollars. So do I want to leave financial assets to people? Clearly you might decide, you know what, we won't have any financial legacy goal because we have the primary residence or the lake house, and we think those are going to be worth plenty once sold to provide the legacy that we like, right? So that's the way to handle that, and that's a little more visible in LifeHub. There are actually some features that our team is working on right now to allow a little bit more fine tuning of purchasing and selling properties and getting those into the plan and into LifeHub a little bit easier in terms of data entry. So you'll see that, and also potential growth and so on, and that'll be coming soon.
Awesome. And then our next question that has the most upvotes is, what do you do when you have a spouse that retires early and you don't want to start withdrawals from your investments until the later retirement, i.e. spouse retires in 2026 and the second spouse retires in 2040, for example?
Yeah, so currently you would want to set the first spouse retiring at the same time as the second spouse. That's a little bit of a hack, right? Because that's not really what's happening, but that will trigger the software to wait until that point to start taking withdrawals. As I said, we do have some features that'll allow you to kind of more explicitly, you can say spouse one at this point, spouse two at this point, and when do I want to start taking withdrawals? Kind of which of these is really when I'm starting the plan. So you'll be able to do that soon. But for now, just put both at the second date.
Awesome. And then next one with some votes is, are state income taxes, for example, California, taken into account?
They are, yeah. So I think in this example, these folks were in Colorado. Colorado has basically a flat tax, although there are lots of deductions and exemptions and things. But if it were California, you have all the rates in there. We update those in the first quarter as soon, and they would be for last year's established tax rates. The reason for that is that's typically the only tax regime where there's firm black letter regulation available. So you may see mid-year, maybe a legislature makes some changes, but you won't see that reflected until the regulations are actually, firm and printed, and then you'll see them in Income Lab. But yeah, and what we have tried to do in order to give 50 state and British Columbia coverage is we cover everything that is most important for retirees. So those would be things like exemptions, deductions, credits that are related to retirement income or to age and so on. So, our tax system is not probably going to cover, I don't know, exemptions on capital gains for cattle in Idaho, right? Things like that are very specific are not, you're not going to find those here.
Perfect. And then maybe one more while we're on talking about taxes and Roths. Question here on Roth optimization. Question is, the analysis appears to not take into consideration the time value of money, i.e. taxes saved in 25 years are weighed the same as taxes paid today. Is this true, and are there plans to consider this in the future?
Yeah, so you do see at least the application of inflation, but it's true that there and with Social Security, I think that it would be very reasonable to apply a time value of money calculation, perhaps your average expected rate on your investments and so on, and that's definitely something we're considering. There are different opinions on how exactly to do that, but yeah, I certainly think that's a reasonable way to go.
Perfect. Okay. And then we did have a few, but I know they're interrupted here, so maybe I'll let you.
No, actually, Roths were the next place I was going to go.
Oh.
So, if there are other questions on that, we can
Yeah.
go right to that. I did. Let's see. I guess the only other what if I have in here other than Ross was delaying Social Security, which is again very easy. We just copy the plan, move the slider, right? So in here we'll see the sliders for Social Security. Now I've delayed John's until 70 here, which is going to mean Mary is at her own for a much longer period of time. And again, to view the difference, the best place to do that is on the income scenarios. And we go from 13,758, keeping all else equal. Okay, we go up by about $200. Now you may decide that's not worth it, right? I mean, that's meaningful, but there's always a trade-off, right? And so now we're more in the retirement hatchet world where we're going to have a longer period of higher withdrawals. You might say, well, I'd rather not tax the portfolio as much, and so on. Or, there could be other considerations, right? Maybe John is of poor health, and there's a chance that Mary will be taking a survivor benefit even sooner. So maybe it makes sense not to delay as long so that she can get that higher benefit. So lots of things, when the difference is that close, other things can come in, right? If this were $1,000, $2,000, then it would probably, we would probably take a much different view of it. The last thing I wanted to do though is on Roth conversion. So again, thinking about the workflow here is we've made a base plan, we've gotten a feeling for what they can spend, we've explored different options in terms of behavior, buying and selling things, planning for future expenses. The next thing is to explore how to fund the withdrawals, and that's about Roth conversions. Now, the place to start that is the tax center, which I'll just show very, very quickly here. And this would be a whole other webinar, which we'll probably do at some point. But the first place we go is we take the base plan, we put it in the tax center, and we can now see a range of possible withdrawal strategies. Now, for these folks, aggressive Roth conversions look to be kind of the top ranked, although you'll see less aggressive are not very different, right? So a lot of times clients are not really comfortable with huge Roth conversions. So, bumping it down to 24 or even 22 might make sense for them. What I've done actually is already done quite a bit of exploring and built a plan with Roth conversions. Since they're pre-retirement, I ended up exploring doing Roth conversions before retirement, which you can now do by going into the advanced settings, clicking specify years when Roth conversions are allowed. Because if you don't do that, it's only going to allow Roth conversions in retirement. So it's going to wait until the retirement year. I customized the years. Now I just said, okay, for the first 10 years of the plan, we're going to allow them. You can be quite specific here. I've talked with people who do, ACA planning where they want to avoid Roth conversions in particular years where maybe couples are getting some tax credits, right? So I've already allowed that. And so if I go to the tax center, now for these folks, I've found a way for them to kind of stick to the 22% bracket, which is usually much more palatable. And now I can see and share with them what that looks like over the first 10 years of their plan, including they're doing about $39,000 of Roth conversions this year, right? So this is, again, just thinking about the workflow: base plan, scenario planning, tax center to try to figure out the withdrawal strategy. That can be an interesting process. And then finally sharing with them kind of how we're going to do this, either in the tax center. So this is a nice place to kind of show how things stack up, or we can go back to Life Hub.
And I was going to say, Justin, while that's pulling, this is one of the questions is, how do you see which funds the plan is pulling from and in what order? And as you mentioned, Life Hub would be the place to do it.
Yeah, this is a place to do it. So in this case, I think I actually forgot to change John's 401k to be available oh no, this is because Mary's 403b is already available, but John's still working, right? So he can't take from his 401k, right? They're not retiring. He's not retiring until 2025, and that plan doesn't allow in-service withdrawals. So initially those Roth conversions are all coming from Mary's 403b here, right? And we see that that's a Roth conversion. They also have those aggressive planned savings going on still. Now Mary's starting Social Security, even though they're not retired. She's taking Social Security because she's going to end up with a spousal benefit, so she might as well. And then once we get to the retirement year, now we'll see, okay, we're doing Roth conversions from John's 401k as well. Even if you don't have a Roth, the system will just put a dummy Roth in here for each client, right? Because it has to have a place to put it. If you have a Roth, it'll just put it into those. So I know that's been a lot of information. I tried to kind of cover things that can be examples you can use, just change them for whatever the situation is for clients. But yeah, in the last 12 minutes here, it looks like we've got a lot in the Q&A. So see what we can get through.
Awesome. Okay. All righty. We have quite the list of questions. So if you do have questions, please drop them in now. Otherwise, Justin, we will work through these. And then I will just start based on the questions that other folks have voted for. So next question is there a way to quickly see which variable or variables are driving the plan, which ones are key, and the advisor and client should revisit those?
I think probably not. What we've noticed is like certain things, for example, if the portfolio is really driving the plan, you'll tend to see that the income plan, the income adjustment plan guardrails are a little closer. Whereas if we have a lot of non-portfolio income, this will be farther away, which kind of makes sense, right? So if 80% of your income is from Social Security and pensions and rental incomes and so on, and you're just taking small withdrawals from your portfolio, well, the portfolio has to change quite a bit for your whole plan to be affected, right? So that's one place that I've seen it. I'm trying to think if there are other things that can drive plans would be like inflation. So we've certainly seen plans that are heavily affected by inflation, for example, with very large pensions that are not adjusted for inflation over time, so nominal pensions. That's typically seen in the plan test. So you'll end up with kind of worse plan test results than you might have expected, because the scenarios that it's testing, the ones with high inflation, did really poorly. But yeah, there's not a single place that'll sort of list the factors that are most important. We've certainly had that request though, and I think it would be a really cool feature. So we'll look at that.
Awesome. Next question is, did you input cost basis on a taxable account?
I did. Yeah, I did. I don't remember what I made it, but yeah. So there are, I think I'm not in this kind of account, but if in your firm admin account, you can set tax assumptions that roughly include turnover, right? So, you can say how much of long-term capital gains are realized each year. And then the system will treat withdrawals, will treat sales within the taxable account as proportional gains and basis. In practice, of course, you may have a different way of approaching that, but that's the assumption built in.
Awesome. Next question is, does Income Lab have a way to estimate health costs such as insurance premiums, medical supplements, plus Medicare out-of-pocket costs, etc.? Similar to kind of how maybe an advisor would do in like Money Guide Pro.
We don't. I do want to show though where Medicare is covered. So Part B, we have updated every year for the actual Part B premiums, and then we have IRMA covered as well. Part D, we just have kind of a, sort of an average Part D premium, but you'll want to change this if your clients are covered by Part D. This would also be if you want every part of Medicare to be in here. You could add Part C premiums if you did like a supplement plan to here, because you won't actually see these split out in the plan itself. It will just group B and D together. And then kind of like with the principal and interest payments on the mortgage, you can also just automatically include Medicare premiums in the plan here as well. But no, there's no kind of specialized health insurance pricing module. Again, that would be great. Or I know there are some specialized software that deal with Medicare and so on. So maybe an integration someday would make more sense.
Yep. And then here's one on taxes. Does the tax calculations include the extra 3.8% tax on higher salary incomes, plus also the 3.8% tax on investment income over 250K? It
does. So the salary income is just going to be added into FICA. So I mean, the amounts will be different. So I think it's an extra 0.9 or 0.8. So I don't know if they make it here. But the net investment income tax is this light blue. It looks like in this plan, now this is the delay Social Security, but otherwise the base plan. So we didn't do anything fancy here with Roth Conversions or anything. And they never pay net investment income tax. But yeah, all those are handled, including the fact that the thresholds for net investment income tax are not adjusted for inflation. So actually in a longer plan, you'll often see net investment income tax come later in the plan. Maybe even if you didn't expect it, because by then those thresholds have actually come down quite a bit in today's dollars.
Awesome. Okay. And then next question here is, got a few coming in. Let's see which one. Oh, okay. So when would you want to use the age-based spending path, for example?
I think it's, anytime if the clients kind of don't buy the idea that they'll spend less in today's dollars, I think that's a reasonable thing to do. If you just want to say, well, okay, let me take this plan and stress test it by not changing spending over time, you can choose flat, which is just inflation adjusted. You could do a custom path where, maybe I don't apply any reductions, for the first, X number of years. And then, it varies that the retirement smile varies, but I think, about 1% a year is reasonable. Maybe you do a lower reduction rate, for example. So there's a lot you can do here. I mean, I think I agree with the basis of the question, which is, for most people, this is probably how they'll behave. Just introspection about people we know. My grandma is still with us and in her very late 80s. She does gardening. She cut her own grass until recently, but she spends a lot less than she used to because she's just much closer to home. So I think that is a very reasonable place to start.
Awesome. And then question here, can you see the annual portfolio withdrawal rate in the software?
There's not a place where that is explicitly. That's definitely not a bad idea. So what we would have to do is instead, well, let's go to the retirement year. We've got portfolio withdrawals here, investment accounts here. And so we'd have to just take this and divide it by that. But yeah, that's an interesting idea.
And then to this question, but I'm going to put two together. So when presenting a plan to a client, do you tend to do reports or just show them Income Lab? And then for the reports, what reports or PDF outputs are available to provide to a client?
That's a great question. So, depending on how you present with clients, I mean, certainly a PDF can never be as pretty and dynamic as an actual computer screen. I mean, LifeHub, for example, probably doesn't shine as much on a PDF since you can't dive in and out. So if that's part of your practice where you can, you have a big screen in your office or, doing it over a virtual meeting like this, that's definitely a place to go. But reports are available for a lot of these views. And so, for example, maybe I want to include kind of that short-term income plan. So what can I spend and what are my guardrails? This is something that you can put together. You could add the long-term outlook, which is okay, but over the longer term, how often might I expect to be above plan or below plan? You can choose, maybe I want to do a tax chart, right? I want to compare two strategies here, or show those explorations, right, of how I'm going to fund that lifestyle. So that's a lot of these views we've turned into, they're typically one-page PDFs. If it's a long plan and it has a table, it will typically go on to 2 or 3 pages. So you can find a lot of these views to turn into PDFs so that you can send them to clients.
Awesome. And then next question is, so LifeHub shows which account to make a Roth conversion from, but does it indicate where the additional tax is paid from?
So in a sense, yes, although you'll see it grouped together with other spending, right? So for example, if I go to LifeHub and take this, the Roth conversion strategy that I have here. And by the way, this is really important. If you're doing Roth conversions, typically, unless they're small, you will want to have chosen solve for this income. And the reason for that is that flips the calculations around from going gross to net to instead starting with net and grossing things up to cover the taxes. So it's a very common issue we run into where, maybe, hey, I had $10,000 a month of income, but then I changed it to Roth conversions. It looks like now I'm netting 2,000. I can't live on that. Well, that's because we need to say, okay, I want, 8. Can you gross me up? And just making sure your desired income is appropriate, and then hitting solve for that income is going to get you there. So now in pre-retirement, they're assuming that they're spending it for they're paying it out of their salaries. So let's get into retirement. So here they are doing these Roth conversions, about 150,000, and they're taking extra from the joint brokerage account to pay for that. But it's essentially the brokerage account plus Social Security plus their other income. It's all this other stuff. The taxes are coming from there. So it's not kind of highlighted which amount from the brokerage is paying the taxes.
Next question here is, in this kind of retire 2020 scenario, could the advisor add a reverse mortgage to bump up the cash flow? Or to
Absolutely.
bump the cash flow?
So that's all of those other income sources, when I talk about the retirement hatchet and so on, you would just add it as an other income flow right here. Or again, from LifeHub, you can also just hit add new.
Perfect. And I know we still have about some questions in the queue. We can maybe, Justin, get through a few. I know for those advisors who do have to hop off, we will send the recording. So if maybe we didn't get to your question, maybe you could still watch the recording for the end here. Justin, let me just look and see which one's here. Maybe we can do two more. Which ones have the most votes? Oh, this one's interesting. So would you recommend running a scenario where things go badly? So for example, the client retires and 6 months later has a stroke and therefore a lot more expenses.
Yeah, I think that's an idea for sure for stress testing. These income scenarios are a good place to do that. You will see there's one statistic. Now, the plan I've built, this doesn't show much of a difference, but one thing we do is we take the plan and we essentially kill off each spouse individually and say, well, if this spouse were to pass away, and any income that's tied to them goes away, what would be left for the surviving spouse? Now, the other thing that happens in that calculation is there's a shorter plan because an individual has a shorter life expectancy than a joint life expectancy in every case. Just mathematically, that's how it works. So now in this case, they both could still spend the same amount. So this is not a very interesting plan, but we certainly see plans where, maybe a lot of the non-portfolio income is tied to one spouse. And so that, in a sense, is you're sort of seeing an automatic stress test. It's essentially taken the plan you've already built, gotten rid of one spouse and said, hey, how much of this could they still fund? So that's something that's automatically done for you. But yeah, these other ideas of, hey, let me, have a particular scenario, that's a great idea.
And then next question here is there a way to offset long-term care expenses with long-term care insurance until the long-term care insurance is exhausted?
Yeah, definitely. So what I didn't show here was, okay, this was sort of a self-insured long-term care, but you could, one thing you can do is just compare the cost, quote unquote, of planning to self-insure, which you can see as the difference in this baseline spending level. So 13.7 compared to 13.4. Compare that to the cost of, in this case, the monthly cost of long-term care insurance, and sort of see if it's worth it. Now, there is a difference there because the long-term care insurance would cover, essentially whenever long-term care comes, whereas this self-insured, I sort of put it in one part of the plan. So you might want to be fairly conservative, maybe push it earlier in the plan and so on. Another thing to be careful about though is inflation adjustments for long-term care insurance, and make sure, that you're kind of comparing apples to apples. Because in self-insuring, I did, adjusting for inflation.
Okay. And then we do have more coming in. I know, Justin, I think maybe we should do a part two because it seems like there's
Sure.
advisors really thought this was interesting and we're getting a ton of questions still. But we can kind of close with this one. So does net legacy just add up all of the assets? The example shows a net loss to legacy, but this advisor assumes that after taxes, it's actually an increase to net legacy.
So yeah, I think you might be referring to, I think this one had a negative. I think we were using 22%. So it keeps wanting me to go to 32, but no, I won't. Oh, okay. Well, 22 is a positive. So let's go back to the one that had a negative. Yeah, so this is just saying, okay, if somebody, I think it's a couple, inherited all of the financial assets and sold them immediately, what would the net legacy be? So the taxes are applied here. Now this is far, it's 31 years from now. That's a relatively small difference. So this is not the kind of difference that probably would tip the scales one way or the other. But yeah, we are applying taxes, adjusted for inflation into the future, as if the heirs simply sell everything.
Awesome. Okay, I know we've gone over it. Just I know we probably.
No, this was great. I think it's a good idea. Maybe we'll do another one. I'll keep the presentation a little shorter, and we can do more questions. So
awesome. Yeah, and we will we'll have this recording, so we can save some of these questions, and then maybe even ask the team to maybe reach out to the advisors who didn't have those questions answered. We could probably shoot them some quick messages here to help with these last questions. Otherwise, please stay in touch. So keep our eyes out for our next webinar next month, which will be a CFP-CE webinar. But now that we have got this response, we'll probably look at the following month, maybe doing part 2 follow-up for this topic as well. At the end of the survey, this webinar, you will get a survey where you can let us know your feedback, as well as future topics you'd like to hear as well. And then for our new first-time visitors, you also be able to let us know next steps of how you'd like our team to engage with you. Justin, thank you so much for a good one everybody today. Thanks everyone for joining, and we will send out the recording tomorrow as well. Alrighty, everyone, take care.